Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the BME Horizon Hot Topics webinar. I am Borbála Schenk, the Chief European Research Funding Advisor of the Budapest University of Technology and Economics. And I am your host today at the BME Horizon Hot Topics webinar. Just a few words about the university. The university has 8 faculties, and it is a leading higher education and research institution in engineering, natural sciences, and social sciences in Hungary and the region. The key research areas of the university include ICT, artificial intelligence, sustainable energy, accumulator and battery technologies, vehicle technology, biotechnology, nanophysics, disaster prevention, among many others. We have more than 1,200 academic staff and more than 20,000 researchers, and we are happy to have you here as our guest today at the webinar. The webinar is organized by the Center for University Industry Cooperation of BME. This unit organizes, coordinates, and strengthens the innovation-related activities of the university, including industry-university relations, knowledge transfer, intellectual property management, and in this task portfolio, also the support for the Horizon Europe research funding framework. We started this webinar in 2021 in November with the aim to create discussion on new trends, concepts, and ideas that define new avenues for this lively, dynamic world of the European research area, to see these trends and to explore how they are reflected in the Horizon Europe framework program. Since the first webinar, since the launch of this webinar, we have had 9 sessions. Today we have the 10th one. And we are very proud to have had excellent guests from various universities, research institutions, or European projects. And we have covered topics: open science, citizen science, societal impact, research ethics, co-creation, and many more. We are live streaming these webinars each week on Monday from 1 to 1:45. Central European Time, and the recordings are available on the homepage, which is horizon.bme.hu/webinars. We would like to have your questions and your comments also for the topics we are discussing. Please use Slido for questions. If you are following us from YouTube, you can find the Slido code in the session description. If you are following us from horizon.bme.hu/webinars, you can find the Slido page embedded there. Please ask questions, please upvote questions. We are really looking forward to hear your opinions and would like to answer the queries you might have. Last week, we had a session on the Hungarian perspective and the Hungarian initiatives of open science. And we have started discussing, we started diving into fair data management a bit. Today, we are going to go into more details. Our guest today is Daniel Spichtinger, who is an open science specialist. And Daniel has been working on EU-funded research projects since 2004. He has been involved hands-on in proposal writing as well as dissemination of research results for several research consortia. From January 2012 and to January 2018, he was employed by the European Commission as a member of the unit responsible for open access to scientific peer-reviewed publications and research data. As of September 2018, he is working in Vienna, Austria, as an independent expert for EU research projects and policy, and as a specialist for issues related to open science. We are very happy to have Daniel here today as our guest, and we are going to talk about the data management plans, how the data management plans appear as requirements in the Horizon Europe Framework Program, and what were the experiences of the project participants in H 2020 with the data management plans. So I'm going to stop this, or maybe, no, I won't. I just stop sharing of this screen, and I'm going to share my other one, which is Danielle's presentation. Just a moment. A bit of a technical, let me just check it. Yeah, it should be here. My apologies for this technical. Yeah, it is here. And it should be somewhere here. Yeah. So sorry, Danielle, for this. Yeah, we are all set. Okay, so just please let me know when I should change slides, okay? And I give the floor to you.
So thank you very much, Bobola, for this very nice invitation. And I'm very happy to be here virtually to talk about data management plans, more from policy perspective. So I think we can go immediately to the next slide. If it works. Yeah, okay, we can go over that as well. And the next one. So Bobola has already very kindly introduced myself, so I think we can pass through that one as well. And here, I think I'm starting a little bit with presenting the context of, data management, data, which in recent years, not necessarily in the research area, but generally, it has become a little bit of a hype, right? Sometimes it's called the key resource of the 21st century. And, then there are comparisons with traditional resources such as oil. And you can see here this cover of The Economist from a couple of years ago, where you have all these companies, a bit like oil rigs, pumping for the data. But that is a little bit a flawed comparison, I like to argue, because unlike oil, it's a renewable resource data, so you can use it more than once. You can use it for different purposes. So, if we must make a comparison to a resource, I would say it's like a renewable resource, so maybe like solar. So if we go to the next slide, the EU generally and digitalization. So it is a priority of the European Commission and the von der Leyen Commission, digitalization and data. But compared, with other more pressing issues, we had COVID, now we have, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine. So there's always something which overshadows it a bit. So it's a little bit hidden, but still there are a lot of activities on data. Most people probably know GDPR. But nowadays it goes a lot beyond GDPR, which deals with personal data, but there's a lot of other data out there. And the idea is to create a single market for data through the EU data strategy. So for instance, recently there was just an AI Act passed on the use of AI for data, the ethical use of AI. So it is a priority, but sometimes a little bit overshadowed. So if we go to the next slide, we can now delve a little bit more into research data. There's a bit of a definition. What is research data? It's, of course, extremely varied in different fields, what you consider research data. But generally, we are talking about data supported by public funds for the purpose of developing publicly accessible scientific research and knowledge. So this is the OECD definition. And we see also that in science and research, data is more and more seen as an inherently valuable product of research rather than as a byproduct. So Of course, it's still the case in a lot of areas that you want to get your scientific publication. That's what counts, and then okay, you have your data. But nowadays, more and more data itself is considered a valuable product of research. And then, of course, we have to question what we do with this data. So if we go to the next slide. And that was a little bit the question that, during my time in the Commission, which is now over, but it covered most of the previous framework program, Horizon 2020. That was one of the questions we dealt with. And at the time, we already had a mandate, provisions for open access to publications. So initially, we had this pilot program on open research data in some thematic areas of Horizon, which was then extended to cover the whole area of all thematic areas of Horizon 2020 as of the work program 2017. But always with the caveat that, of course, there are also good reasons why some data cannot be made open. It has to be closed, if it's personal data, for instance, or if there are some clear IP reasons. We were always saying we respect that, and we don't want all data to be open, but rather the principle is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So if we go to the next slide. So what was the main obligation in Horizon 2020 in this open research data area? It was actually to create a data management plan. And this is also why this is the topic of the presentation. What is a data management plan? A data management plan describes the data management life cycle of the data to be collected, processed, and or generated by the Horizon project. And then we have some information about what should be included. We also basically said, okay, if you are not participating in our open research data pilot because you are opting out, right? So you say, I have personal data, I have IP data, so I don't want to share this data. Then in Horizon 2020, you could also opt out of making a data management plan. This now, and I will talk about that later, in Horizon Europe has changed. So in Horizon Europe, you always need a data management plan, even if you keep some data closed, because the idea is even data that is closed should be well managed, well curated, and well preserved. So if we go to the next slide, some funders, and I don't know a lot, it's maybe something we can discuss afterwards about the situation in Hungary, but some funders also require, actually nowadays quite a lot of funders require data management plans in the UK, in the United States. And sometimes these data management plans are required when you submit your project proposal. But in Horizon 2020, at the time we said, there's quite a lot of bureaucracy basically to do when you submit your project proposal. So some of you who are submitting, they know that. So we actually said, you don't have to submit a full data management plan when you do your proposal. You actually do your data management plan once your project has started, and you do a first version of it as an obligatory deliverable, if you don't opt out, within the first 6 months of the project. Of course, within the first 6 months of the project, you will not know all the details of the data you generate in 2 years. So the idea is also that a data management plan is a living document which is updated through the course of the project when you have some significant new results. Also, you can do it, for instance, when you have a project review. But certainly at the end of the project, you should also do an update when you're basically in your final phase. Initially, we got a lot of questions, okay, how should this data management plan look like? So at the time, we developed a data management plan template, a PDF document. But this use of this template is voluntary. So if you have your own template, if you have your own processes, you don't need to use the Commission one. The ERC also has such a template, which is slightly different from the Commission one. But the same here, the use is voluntary. So it's for you to give you guidance. There are also some online tools which you can use, like DMP Online from the Digital Creation Center in Edinburgh, or the Argos tool from OpenAir. These are online tools, so they are maybe a bit more modern than a PDF document. Those are not officially endorsed by the EU, but they are compliant with the requirements of Horizon DMP. Now we can go to the next slide. So I started with outlining a little bit in Horizon 2020 this idea of open data. But we very quickly also at the time, I think, realized that data that is just open doesn't necessarily mean it's useful, right? So if it's open, but I can't find it because it's somewhere saved, nobody knows where, it's not interoperable, and you don't actually have the rights to do anything with it, then okay, yeah, it's open, but the uses are quite limited. So in the recent years, and it might be interesting maybe to discuss afterwards with you how many have heard this acronym. There is this acronym called FAIR data, which stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. And this is actually seeing data in its larger context. And you can discuss the issue of openness under the accessibility criteria, but we see that there are also other criteria. Can I find the data? Is it interoperable? Is it reusable? And of course, there are a lot of sub-issues to each of those headings. So I think in this presentation, we don't have enough time to really go into the details, but you will also see in the Commission guidance what is actually expected to be covered under all of these components of FAIR data. So the idea is really, maybe, at some point data cannot be open or cannot be fully open, but it should still be managed well and preserved well. And, this is really the overarching, nowadays, the overarching rationale also for a data management plan. So if we go to the next slide. So I'm saying a little bit now about, what are the changes in Horizon Europe compared to Horizon 2020. It's not an excessive presentation of all the changes, but in the end, I also found a nice website which has really a very in-depth comparison on all the open science requirements and comparing them to Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. So there is a more detailed link in the end. But generally, the governing principle, which is even in the regulation, so that's the main document for Horizon Europe, which has been passed by Council and Parliament, is the idea to cover the governing principle to manage data responsibly in line with the FAIR principles and as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So it's kind of a little bit the lessons we learned from Horizon 2020. Now, it's still the case that you don't need a full data management plan at the proposal stage, but you do need to say something about data management as part of the proposal template. So those of you who know the proposal template, in Horizon 2020, there was a little bit to be said about data management under impact. Now this has moved to excellence, because we think, or the Commission thinks, that managing your data well is part of the scientific process. So we still have the general rule that all projects that generate, collect, reuse data will have to establish and regularly update a data management plan. So you cannot opt out of making a data management plan in Horizon Europe. You can opt out of making data open. So I hope this distinction is clear. You will have to deposit the data in a trusted repository. So something that's new in Horizon Europe is this adding of the word trusted, right? So it shouldn't be, any repository. It shouldn't be like, for instance, as much as this is used sometimes, things like ResearchGate and so all of that, but really a repository that conforms to quality criteria. And if you look in the Horizon Europe guidance, it's then elaborated a lot more of what actually is a trusted repository. You will see that also in the two subpoints here. A valid repository that will provide persistent identifiers and metadata. And I didn't go into that a lot because of time reasons, but in order to make data findable, so the F in FAIR, you do need to have some metadata, because otherwise you can't find it. In a very few cases, I haven't seen much of those, but there are some actions, some projects where it will be said, okay, that this data should be deposited in a repository that is part of the European Open Science Cloud. So the European Open Science Cloud, I don't know if you had already a talk about that, but that's really an own separate topic. But if there's interest, I would also be happy to come back and talk about EOSC, which is still very much a work in progress. So what else is there to do under Horizon Europe? Ensuring open access as soon as possible under a Creative Commons license. So that is CC BY or CC 0, or an equivalent license. And here we have the opt-out, unless exceptions apply. So if you cannot make data open, that's also okay, but you need to justify it in the data management plan. And you should also at least say a little bit in the data management plan about other research outputs that you produce. So software, algorithms, protocols. And if possible, make them also available, but that's kind of if possible. So it's not a hard requirement. If we move to the next slide, I'm going now to the second part of my talk, which is what were the experiences of beneficiaries. And Horizon Europe is still fairly new. So in this part, I will concentrate on the experiences in Horizon 2020, which is also one of the reasons why I kind of started with explaining what were the requirements in Horizon 2020. So we move, and I did here this project. That was at the time a project that I did for the University of Vienna, but as part of the Open Air project. And we wanted to analyze data management plans in order to identify good practices. So I think we can move over that slide. This is just some information on about the project. So we basically did a qualitative analysis of 6 data management plans, and we looked at all the data management plans in Horizon 2020 that were available. So they were marked as a public deliverable. As you know, in Horizon, you can decide is your deliverable public or not. And those data management plans that were marked on as public, we downloaded them from Cordis. We screened them to make sure that, in fact, they are really public. Sometimes there were some mistakes, and that they were really data management plans and not something else. And also that they were not copyrighted. And then we put them on the repository of the University of Vienna, which is called FEDWA. So there on this link that you have, you can access 840 data management plans. This is a nice resource if you want to look at data management plans. They are not quality screened, so they are not best practices. They are really what exists out there. So you can have a look at what other people have done for the data management plan. You can enter some keywords also to search for your area that you're interested in. And from these 840 data management plans, we then checked, who were the contact persons, and we sent them a survey about the experience. And what I'm going to talk about now, this, experiences of beneficiaries, it's based on the results of the survey and this qualitative analysis. And for these 6 DMPs, we also did some qualitative interviews. So if we go to the next slide. For the survey, we had 108 respondents of the 840 projects, so 108 projects, more or less. 87 with the acronyms, that was included in the annex. I don't think we have it here. 21 anomalous. Not everybody answered all the questions. They could also be skipped, but most of them did. And you will see, when I go through the results, who answered what. 63% of the projects that answered of the 108 were ongoing, 37 completed. With the qualitative interviews, it was the other way around. 4 were completed and 2 were ongoing. So we can go to the next slide. I summarize now the results of the survey according to some topics that were very prominent. So it's not going one by one through the questions, it's a kind of a summary of the results. Next slide. Those are the themes that I'm going to summarize them on. What was the impact of the mandate for open data? What is the relation to project management and DMPs? What was the support? What support was available? What was wanted? And what is the availability of data management plans? Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Impact of the mandate. So we asked, when you did your Horizon 2020 project, was that the first time you encountered this concept of the data management plan? And 45% said yes, and 54% said no. So it's not the majority for which it was the first time they encountered data management plans, but still a sizable minority for whom it was the first time they dealt with data management plans through the requirement in Horizon 2020. Next slide. So from the qualitative interviews, we found that in the beginning, when this was starting in 2014, there was not a lot of knowledge out there. But since then, the knowledge about what is a data management plan, how to do it, it has increased significantly. So we can see that this is really a fast developing field. Competences are increasing. One, suspicion I had was that a lot of projects would regard this more as a bureaucratic burden. I have to do another document for the Commission. Although, in fact, the data management plan, that should really be for you to manage your data well, although it's also a requirement. So I was quite positively surprised that 82% of the people that we asked in the survey said it was actually useful, or at least partly useful, to do a DMP beyond it being a EC requirement. So there is a sense that, in fact, it does make sense to do a DMP. Next slide. So that is exactly this slide, the results that I presented before. If you count the yes answers and the partially yes, you get to these figures. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So I think these figures, 82%, it does show, that there was some impact of the mandate. Project management. I was interested, what work package is the data management plan part of? And, in my qualitative analysis, I encountered two options primarily, that it's part of the management work package and part of the dissemination work package. In the survey, there was also a number of projects which choose a third option, that there is an own work package on data management. So that's, of course, for data intensive projects that need that. But you can see this was a minority, 17%. For most of them, it was in fact part of the project management work package. And this, for me, is a valid work package to have it in. Although there should also be some connections with the dissemination work package. So, it might have some impact on what you disseminate, how you disseminate. Next slide. Generally, we found that it makes good sense to have one person among each of the project partners responsible for data management. But it's sometimes, especially in the qualitative analysis, you could see that these data management plans, they were just stitched together from all these individual contributions, and there was no red line really. I mean, there was no red thread in a way, no narrative. So that's what I call a little bit the Frankenstein approach. You say Frankenstein's monster, you just put all the parts together. So what we would actually recommend is not only that there is one person for data management at each partner, but for the whole consortium, there's one person, maybe at the coordinator, who gets all the input and then makes a coherent document out of it. How difficult or easy was it to interact on data management issues within the consortium with the partners? We had there a scale from 1 to 10, very easy 1, 10 very difficult, and most answers were clustered around 5 to 8. So in the end, I have some links where you can also look at the graphics. So 5 to 8 means not extremely difficult, but also not very easy. Some challenges, this was more from the qualitative interviews, was how do I deal with personal data, GDPR, but also the amount of time and resources that data management takes, and the coordination among geographically distant partners. But of course, that's generally an issue when you have a Horizon project. Some were also saying, okay, it also depends on the types of data that are generated. Interestingly, in one project from the qualitative interview, there was a user agreement that was signed with the researchers on that the data belongs to them, but the project has limited usage right. That is interesting because it's one of the few that actively take up the legal issues of who the data belongs to. And there was one interviewee who also pointed out, quite rightly, that data management does not necessarily mean open. And they say, okay, we decided to open some of the data which we deposited on Zenodo for scientific purposes. Next slide. Templates. I mentioned before that there were these optional templates. And interestingly enough, 40% use these templates, either from the Commission or from the Research Council. How useful they are, there were different opinions. Some were saying, okay, we need something a little bit more tailor-made than just one template for all kinds of projects. So, for instance, one option would be to have an EC-approved data management tool building on maybe what is already out there, the tools that I mentioned already, the DCC tool or Argos. Next slide. Support. So support was primarily received from other project partners, sometimes the library, and in rare cases from the IT department. But what is interesting and maybe a little bit worrying is that 26%, so the second largest number, actually didn't receive any support at all. So those that did receive support, mostly from other partners in the project, but quite a high number that didn't get any support. Next slide. So we also asked a little bit, because I think I mentioned it, the data management plan is an obligatory deliverable to be submitted by month 6 and updated. And we also asked, well, did you get feedback from the Commission or the agency, if the agency does the project management? And unfortunately, I would say 55% didn't really get any feedback. And then the other ones got split in half, either feedback from the project officer or from the reviewers. Those that did get feedback, they did say that feedback was quite useful. Okay, next slide, yeah. So support, again, going a little bit back to the qualitative interviews, especially at the beginning of the mandate, and if you are a newcomer to the whole issue, they felt a little bit lost. And especially before we made this template available, there was a significant amount of self-learning to be done. So they had to, consult, different sources. How do I actually do a data management plan? So that's maybe one of the reasons why a number of interviewees also asked for a dedicated EC contact to help them with data management in Horizon. And that could be something akin to the IP help desk. So maybe some of you know the IP help desk. If you want to know something about IP in Horizon, you have this IP help desk, which is a contract from the Commission, and it's run by an external organization. Something like that could also be done for data management, so one-stop shop for Horizon research data management. I think that would be a good idea. But that's my own personal recommendation. Then last but not least, curation and availability of data management plans. Where did projects make the data management plan available, if it was available publicly? The largest amount of people said, actually, we don't make it available, 38%. Then they put it, the second largest says, on the project website, Well, this is of course not ideal because a couple of years after the project, the website gets shut down. Where we would like it to be would be in a repository, and that's 22% who said we make it available in a repository. Next slide. So that points to the importance of CORDIS, where you can see the publicly available data management plans, but also to the importance of still needing to raise awareness that, actually DMPs, they are an outcome of your project. Please also deposit them in a trusted repository. Next slide. That is just a summary. So, if you were kind of busy in between, I will not repeat what I said previously, but that's a little bit the summary from the study, from the experiences. And I think we are with that, looking also at the time. I think we have, maybe we can see, I don't know if there's another slide. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is about more information. So if you want to know like the questionnaire that we used, you can find this as supplementary material. We also published an article where these findings that I have described now, they are written down as an article in Open Research Europe. This is also a very interesting project, Open Research Europe, maybe also something for a future session. There's also a blog. I then did some follow-up work on the use of Creative Commons licenses in these DMPs, but that's not published yet. And last but not least, an external link really on open science in Horizon Europe, which has a very nice and detailed comparison, not only for data, but for all other aspects of open science between what has changed between Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. Next slide. And that's the final slide. So these are my contact details on Twitter, email, and LinkedIn. So we have a few minutes, I think, still for questions. But if we run out of time, you are also welcome to contact me if you have further questions. So on that note, I would hand over to Barbara, and I think you have checked the Slido, right, on whether we have some questions.
We actually have quite a lot of questions.
Oh, good.
So,
that's nice.
Okay.
That shows people have been paying attention.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation, Daniel. I'm going to share the Slido now. And yeah, so what can be seen, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the most popular question did not actually relate to data management plans per se, but they're rather, have you seen examples of the commercial exploitation of scientific databases? How should we plan for the exploitation of data sets? So, of course, providing them open access is a kind of route for its exploitation, but we are thinking about, or I guess that this question relates to other types of exploitation.
Yeah, so that's of course a little bit a detailed question, as you say. It's on the nexus, I would say, between exploitation, dissemination, data management. So certainly a database, we could also say, it is a data. So I would say there's the question: do you want to commercially exploit it? If you want to, you can. So that's also an issue, if you say, I don't want to make my data set open because I want to commercially exploit it, then that's fine. But then that should be demonstrated. So for instance, if you have industry partners, they usually have quite a good idea of what they want to do with the data. So normally, when we talk about partners wanting to commercially exploit their data, it's usually the industry. And they know how to do that, right? They want to do that. So that's why I haven't really seen a lot of commercial exploitation from universities, right? So there they are more, okay, I want to write my paper and I want to have the underlying data for that, but not so much the commercial exploitation. I guess, Barbara, you will share the links afterwards and the presentation. And you can also look at all these 840 data management plans. I mean, that's why we put them. And you can maybe look in your area, search for your thematic area and the keywords. The interface is available in German and English. And maybe you can find some data management plans in your area and have a look there whether there is some commercial exploitation. I would say it's more the exception. And maybe some of that could be also a bit of a flaw in the sample, because many of the data management plans that have commercial exploitations, they may not be open, because they say, okay, if I make it open, they know I have this data set. So we could, of course, only access open data management plans.
Thank you very much.
There was another question, I think,
about
the second one was also quite interesting.
Yeah, I would actually jump to this third one and then to the second if we have time for that.
Yeah.
How can a repository become trusted repository? Can we use university repositories to fulfill the Horizon Europe requirement?
There, I have to say this is new, right? Because it used to say, okay, a repository. Now it's a trusted repository. And there I don't have in front of me the exact requirements for a trusted repository. So there, if Barbara reminds me, I can send them along later on, because I don't know them by heart. Or if you look in the Horizon Europe guidance, you will find what they consider a trusted repository. Generally, in Horizon 2020, a university repository was fine. And I think probably in most cases it will still be. But it's something which, one would need to check versus the requirements. And I don't know that by heart.
Thank you very much. The second question was making data open and useful, as well, it's a citation from you, requires a lot of work. Can we allocate dedicated time and budget for that in the Horizon Europe project?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you would need to think about which work package you want to include it, but definitely it's an eligible cost.
Great to hear. Thank you. How can universities best support the researchers in meeting the EC's requirements of data management? You mentioned that it was a general feeling of the participants that they were lost a bit and they were left without any kind of guidance. What would your suggestion be? What can a university do?
I think it would be important to bring them together, maybe also with their own IT support. So sometimes I had the feeling that, a university, maybe they had some support, but just the researchers didn't know about it. And that can be either the IT department, sometimes in libraries. So I know University of Vienna, for instance, the library does a lot about data management. So it's just a question of bringing them together. And very often, the researchers still in writing their proposal, it will not be this data management plan. It will not be the first thing they think about, right? They have all of the other things to think about. And then, so there may be capacities already available that they could use at the university. And also in open air, they have these so-called NOADs, which are national contact points, and they could also help. And then I think there is still a gap, and I personally would still think that it would be good to have such a one-stop shop, which is on a contract from the Commission, and if you have a question, you can contact them. But that doesn't exist, and I'm not sure that it's a priority for the Commission. But I would say that would be a nice support we could offer.
Absolutely, and if you are watching from the Budapest University of Technology and Economics, and you have some problems with the data management plan, please contact the Horizon Europe team, FIEC, okay? And we will try to work something out, okay? So I think we only have time for one last question.
I still have some time, so it depends on, if you want to go over time, that's...
I'm just looking at my colleague. Can we do a couple of minutes? Okay, great. I got the green light for that. Okay, so how can you actually find these open data sets that might be interesting for your research?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It really depends on your area. Sometimes you have databases which are from your area where you can find them. So repositories, for instance, about genetic material, usually it's in a thematic repository and it's well known among those researchers, but it doesn't happen all the time. Nowadays, Google, I think, has a dataset search, but whether I would recommend that is another another issue, because it's of course a commercial company that does that, and whether it really works well, I don't know. So the findability is still an issue, and that's a little bit the connection also to another question I see up there about the European Open Science Cloud, because that would be the idea of the European Open Science Cloud, that you have an interface, you type in what kind of data you're interested in, and it tells you, oh, this data is at the repository of the University of so-and-so. You click on there and you get to the data, and maybe you have to log in, but the European Open Science Cloud would be that interface. So, you know, we can talk about that maybe in another event, or maybe even with some other speakers. But the Open Science Cloud, it exists, but it exists in an embryo form, I would say. So we are not there yet, but I think that would be the idea.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I'm really considering having a session exclusively for the European Open Science Cloud. So, and these questions just actually reaffirm this ambition, because it would be very, very interesting to see where this process is right now and what are the possible future directions. Okay, one other question. You mentioned that DMPs have to cover other research outputs as well, like softwares, algorithms. How does the DMP relate to the exploitation plan then?
I think it should be coherent. So, you know, if you say in the DMP, I make it open, and you say in the exploitation plan, I apply a patent, then maybe that's not very coherent. Although, of course, once you have the patent, you can also make it open, but not in the application phase. So it should be coherent. So basically, what the requirement in the DMP is for this other research output is, you know, to provide information that it exists. So for instance, for software, you know, if it's a very specific software that you need to access that result, at least it should be written there, okay, you need that software. And ideally, if the software can be provided, then that's, of course, very much encouraged. But my understanding is that both in Horizon 2020 and in Horizon Europe, this wasn't a hard requirement. So it was not obligatory to do.
Okay. Thank you. And one very last question, which is actually not here, just I would be very interested in that when we are setting up the ethics section of the Horizon Europe proposals, we have to talk about data management in terms of personal data. How can we avoid the repetition in the ethics section and at the data management part? What would be your suggestion here?
Yeah, there is a little bit of an overlap there. That's true. But certainly a data management plan, it goes beyond just managing the personal data, but it is part of that. And, you know, it may be that when you write the text for one, you can basically then just use the text for the second one as well. So in this specific component of personal data, there's definitely an overlap there. So I'm afraid that's just something that there is just an overlap between these two issues. But that said, you know, if you develop your text on this issue for one of these, then you can use the same text. So yeah, very similar. So it shouldn't be too much of an extra work.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for your extra time as well, and for answering all these questions. And I hope that we will continue this discussion at one point. I would also be very curious about your experiences in publishing in Open Research Europe. So as you said that you published the results of the survey there. So we will continue at some point. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone in the audience for your active participation and your interest. Next week is Easter Monday, so we are going to have the next session on the 25th of April, and we are going to deal with research integrity. Okay, so have a nice rest of the day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you. It was nice to be here.